Welcome to the Stressless Eating Podcast, where we help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women break themselves out of the food and body prison, end the dieting madness, and take control of their health for good. I'm your host, Leanne Ellington, and this podcast is about answering one question. How can you heal your relationship with food and your body and take a practical approach to this whole self-love journey, but without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy to do so? If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place. All this information is 100% free, so please subscribe to and review our podcast. Have you ever gone to start a new plan or program and on the surface you're gung-ho, ready to take it by the reins, deeply committed and hoping, actually praying that this time really is different, that this will be the thing that changes everything for you. But secretly in the back of your mind, you're waiting for it to fail. Perhaps you're even outright expecting it to fail because you know in your heart of hearts that even though the plan or the program itself might be different, you know deep down that you haven't changed, that you haven't gotten your mind, your head, your brain, and your heart aligned in a way that would cause things to be different. Before we get into the meat of today's episode, I want to introduce you to a concept, and it's this idea that we are master storytellers. We have all these conflicting voices in our heads directing us. Some feel good and some not so good, especially the ones that lead us away from self-love and self-acceptance, specifically the voices of shame, blame, guilt, comparisonitis, and perfectionism. Well, I call that your inner bitch. And this is where I want to introduce you to our next weight of the weight that we want to ditch. It's the weight of harsh judgments, self-criticism, guilt, shame, blame, comparisonitis, and perfectionism in our self-image and self-talk. It's the emotion side of things that typically comes alongside food and dieting and your body and all that good stuff. So we already talked about ditching the weight of the fight, and I call this ditching the bitch. So if you have a voice in your head, that voice judging you based on what or how much you do or don't eat, that voice telling you that this is just how you are or this is how you'll always be. That inner critic whispering in your ear all the things that you're not doing, reminding you of what you don't like about yourself or all the ways that you're failing. That voice telling you that you're not enough, that you'll never be skinny enough, successful enough, pretty enough, good enough, period. I call that your inner bitch. And that is the real weight that needs to be ditched. You've got to stop feeding her. And this parable sums up what I mean perfectly. It goes like this. One evening, an old Cherokee Indian told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside of us all. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee simply replied, "The one that you feed." So let's talk about this. Yes, judgment, guilt, shame, blame, and comparison can be used as powerful tools when used strategically, to give us signs and signals of ways of being that we don't want to practice. But for most women, they have become massive weapons of internal resistance. And that's because feeling guilty about what you did or didn't eat or do or say, or feeling ashamed of your habits or your behaviors or who you are showing up as in any given moment in time, or continually blaming yourself, blaming others, or blaming those darn irresistible cookies for being so delicious, comparing yourself to where you think you should be or what you should be doing, or comparing your worst to someone else's best, or letting your inner perfectionist run the show. And with her, it's never enough. You'll never be enough, never doing enough, good enough, smart enough, skinny enough, period. This is the part that's not working. This is what's causing you so much unhappiness. So again, back to the two wolves, what are you feeding? Which version of yourself are you feeding? What seeds are you watering? Because I promise you this, you are getting fed either way. It's just a matter of if you let your default take over or if you consciously feed it. And just like we talked about last episode in the Tale of Two Cookies, it's not benign. In fact, it's the part that's fattening. So what are you feeding? And what if you ditched that weight, like the weight of harsh judgments, self-criticism, guilt, shame, blame, comparisonitis, and the emotion that typically comes alongside food and dieting and your body? And trust me, it does not have to. But most women, in reality, they take a look at this last. But I'm telling you, it's one of the main things causing and perpetuating your struggles. And I can promise you this. Let's say you do reach your ideal weight or your ideal size. If you've been being hyper judgmental and self-critical and shaming and blaming and comparing yourself your whole life, that doesn't just magically go away. If you don't address the habits and the thinking and the behaviors that got you there, law of cause and effect says that you'll go create more of the same. Because knowing what to do is one thing, but getting yourself to do it is a whole other ballgame. And that's why I'm here to remind you that you cannot out-diet and outperform or outsmart your self-image and your brain. So if your inner self-talk is taking you in the direction of failure or disbelief or straight up unhappiness, it's leading you in the wrong direction. And this is what's keeping you stuck in the struggle and on that up and down roller coaster. So what are you feeding and which wolf will win? Because once again, food is not the problem. Food is not the enemy. It's the emotion and judgment and guilt and stress that's usually associated with food that's the problem. Because the enemy isn't really an enemy at all. It's simply the voice of your self-image and self-talk that's making food personal. And that's the part that isn't working. And that's the part that doesn't have to be there. It's totally optional. So back to the subject of your inner bitches. One of the biggest struggles that my stressless eating clients have when they come to me is the inner chatter and internal self-talk of what I call the never gonna bitches. And so those are those voices that sabotage you before you even begin anything, like begin a new program, begin a new diet, begin a new chapter in your life, right? It's those voices that say like, you're never gonna get there. What makes you think that this time is gonna be any different? Or maybe yours says like, you're never gonna stick with this long term. Like, you know how this story ends. Or you're never actually gonna get past this. Like, just face it. You're gonna be dealing with this for the rest of your life. Or you're never gonna see this through. Like, this is just gonna be one more thing that you start and don't finish. So why bother? So yes, I call them the never gonna bitches. And so Yours might have a different name or a different face, but if you're anything like myself or the women I work with, you too have done your share of trying to out diet them or out motivate them or out willpower them or outsmart them. Yeah, I call those the never gonna bitches. And so yours might have a different name or a different face, but if you're anything like myself or the women I work with, you too have done your share of trying to out diet them or out motivate them or out willpower them or outsmart them. Unfortunately, though, that's the part that's not working, and I promise you will never work because, you see, just like we talked about before, it's not a diet or food problem, and it's not a motivation or self-sabotage problem. And it's not because you are indeed destined to stay this way forever or never gonna figure it out. It's a thinking problem. It's a brain problem. It's a self-image problem. Specifically, it's a self-esteem problem. Like, it's the self-trust factor that's working against you. And I see it all the time. Like, women come to me and their self-esteem is totally shot because time after time, they've witnessed themselves starting, stopping, starting, quitting, starting, and then saying, okay, screw it. That by the time they come to me, they're at that point where they don't believe a word they say when they say things like, okay, this time it's going to be different, or this time I'm for real. Because in reality, they've witnessed themselves time after time making promises to themselves that they don't keep, can't keep, or just flat out don't even want to keep. So not only do they not believe a word they say when they make promises to themselves that this time it's going to be different, but on top of that, they believe themselves less and less every time they go to make a new promise, a new commitment, or a new declaration, essentially ensuring that their self-esteem bank account, for lack of a better way of saying it, stays chronically overdrawn. So again, it's not a diet or a food problem, a motivation or self-sabotage problem. It's a self-esteem thing. But that's a great problem to have. Because the great news about that is that addressing your self-esteem and self-image is totally treatable. It's something you can transform almost immediately with the right strategies and the right tools. Yet, unfortunately, most women don't do this. They simply commit to the next diet or the next plan or program or the next shiny short-term solution or band-aid, and they never address the real problem. They never address all the other stuff that's bogging them down, bringing them down, and weighing them down. Again, that's the weight of the weight that I keep mentioning. Because again, the weight on your body isn't the real weight. The real weight is all this other stuff that we as women carry around with us in our heads and in our hearts. The real weight can be found embedded in our thoughts and inside the walls of the stories that we're telling to ourselves and about ourselves. And once you make that shift, like once you ditch that weight, everything works. Every plan of action becomes actionable. Everything begins to flow. And why is that? It's because you start working, because you become the cause of the action, and because you begin to flow. But I promise you this kind of transformation, it cannot be found in another diet or program or plan, because those things are not the problem. You are the problem, but by golly, you are also the beautiful solution. And wow, what an opportunity that is, because that means that you don't have to stay on the roller coaster. And that means that you can ditch the disempowering self-image and self-esteem and self-worth, and of course the self-talk that's driving you absolutely bonkers. And that means that you can opt out of the dieting madness and the food obsession and the stress and emotion that comes alongside your body. But again, it doesn't have to any longer, because then you can just breathe and think and feel how you want to feel without worrying about being good enough or thin enough or pretty enough. Like, that is the power you hold when you take a self-image solution approach, aka a brain approach and a nervous system approach to your struggles with your health and your body and food. And it really is a power that any woman can cultivate. But again, I promise you this, it cannot and will not be found in another diet, another program, or another plan, because you can't out diet and outperform and outsmart your current brain, your current default thinking, and your current self-image. And this is where I invite you and every woman in this world to start. Okay, so back to this idea of losing trust in yourself. One of the most common struggles that my clients face is what I call the girl who cried wolf syndrome, okay? So essentially, it's when you've tried so many things that haven't worked, each time declaring something along the lines of like, this time I'm really gonna do it, like this is the time, or this is the one, this is the program, plan, diet, fill in the blank that's gonna work for me. Or this is the last one. This is the last program, plan, diet, and it's gonna end the need for all plans or programs or diets, right? That when it comes time to start the next diet, the next plan, the next round of grit and determination and willpower, not only do they not believe themselves that it's actually gonna be different this time, but they are terrified to share it with anyone else. So like whether that's their partner, their friend, their colleague, out of fear that they won't even believe them or take them seriously. Like they've performed this whole song and dance enough times that they have now officially become the girl who cried wolf. I see this happening all the time too. Heck, it's exactly how I used to feel each time I started out some new plan or new method that eventually I just stopped talking about it altogether or telling anyone at all. Like it gave me some solace knowing that when I eventually strayed, at least I could confine the disappointment to me and myself and not have to explain it to anyone. But this only adds another layer of struggle, shame, and loneliness, or that feeling like you're alone in your journey, both of which are silent killers. So, what's the solution? Well, first, let's talk about why this keeps happening. I've found that it usually falls into one of the following categories. The first category is you actually keep getting smarter. Yeah, that's what I said. I said you keep getting smarter. Okay, so listen to me. Hear me out. After attempting one unsustainable, restriction-driven plan after another, it's only logical to assume that willpower and discipline won't magically show up for you this time around any more than it did the last time at least, and that if things play out the way they usually do, it is actually safe to assume that this new plan won't work either. It's actually smart of you to make this assumption, and 9 times out of 10, you would be right. So category number 2, your brain keeps getting smarter. So this is a brain thing, and as you're learning, you cannot outsmart your brain or the wiring in your brain. So without getting too geeky, it's helpful to know that those short-term habits and those long-term always have them actually become a habit in your brain kind of habits. They live in 2 separate parts of the brain, okay? The long-term brain is driven by ease and pleasure. And when your brain experiences the opposite of those 2 things, like resistance, force, persuasion, or that constant hunger when you're dieting, it essentially says like, okay, don't worry, brain. We don't have to move this over to the long-term part of our brain because she won't be doing this very long. And again, 9 times out of 10, it would be right. And then category 3. Your heart and soul and intuition keep getting more tuned in. So let's be honest, this whole food and body and self-acceptance journey is not a rational one. It's emotional. It tugs at your heartstrings. It nags at your spirit. And it's rare that I speak with a woman that doesn't know that her problem is not going to be solved with another diet. You cannot out logic and reason your way through an emotional problem. Otherwise, you'll always be simply addressing the effects. And as we've talked about before, a lot of those ways of addressing the problem, aka dieting and the weight loss mentality, it actually makes the problem worse. And if you're like me and most women I know, when you get truly and painfully honest with yourself, your heart and soul and spirit knows that another diet won't cut it either, that you need a different approach, that you need something more. And 9 times out of 10, you would be right. So, are you the girl who cried wolf? So here's where I'll come in. I'm going to argue to say that no, absolutely not. I believe that you're actually getting smarter, and that your brain is getting smarter, and that your intuition is getting more honed in. Because again, this is not a you problem. It's just that the way you've been going about it has set you up to fail. It's set you up to appear like you're the girl who cried wolf. But that's not who you are. You've just been playing a losing game, like one that even the most powerful, resilient, willpower-driven woman couldn't sustain very long. Like, I have no doubt that you do genuinely want to solve this problem, close the loop, and make this time the last time. So the solution then becomes, how can you set yourself up for a game that you can actually win? How can you embark on a journey that makes you happy, that makes your brain happy, and makes your heart and soul happy so that you can stick with it and that you do stick with it? That is where your version of the solution lives. And the girl who cried wolf can't and won't exist in that space. It's when we keep playing that short-term gratification, quick results, put a band-aid on the problem kind of game, aka diets and quick fixes, and never find the long-term solution, like never actually heal our struggles, well, that's when the girl who cried wolf, she's gonna continue to follow us around. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard and you're interested in breaking out of your own food, body, and diet prison, here's what I want you to do next. Head on over to stresslesseating.com. That's stresslesseating.com and sign up to watch the Stressless Eating webinar, where I'll walk you through the exact 5-step game plan my female clients use to conquer emotional eating, self-sabotage, and finally heal themselves from the restrictive all-or-nothing diet mentality for good, but without obsessing or spending years in therapy to address it. I've laid it all out for you there in 5 easy steps. Remember, healing your relationship with food and your body does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen, and we've helped clients all over the world take back their power from the food and find true and lasting freedom, while enjoying life and warm chocolate chip cookies along the way. To see if we can help you do the same, head on over to stresslesseating.com. I'm Leanne Ellington, and I'll see you next time.